This magnificent aircraft is the second restoration of a Blenheim by a dedicated team of volunteers here at Duxford. The first restoration took over 12 years to complete, and within a month of the aircraft's first flight, it was tragically destroyed in an accident caused by pilot error. Amazingly, the team decided to attempt a second restoration. This took them just 5 years to complete, and the result is this wonderful aircraft, the Spirit of Britain First.
Because of the age of these particular engines, they need a certain amount of pre-flight, pre-oiling and such forth. So the first object is to remove the cowlings to facilitate the entry into the engines. Small hatches are taken off. There are the fillers for the hydraulic and the oil tank. First one he's doing is the actual hydraulic tank, and he'll check the contents of that. And the second one is the oil filler, which he'll check the contents of that. Removes the bottom parts of the gills so as we can get at the exhausts to actually take the exhaust pipes off. We must take the exhaust pipes off on this particular thing so as we can actually get at the spark plugs. Right, the next thing that Colin will take out is a single plug, which is the very bottom plugs of each cylinder on the bottom banks. This is to drain any oil out of the cylinders that might have accumulated in draining down since it last flew. Well, the next thing is to drain the actual sump. This contains about half a gallon of oil. Of course, this oil is cold, so we don't need that oil in that sump to try and circulate it around the engine. It's very thick, so it won't circulate. So when we go to actually hot oil the engine, it'll be hot oil in the sump rather than this thick, gooey cold. Now, recapping over this, is that these engines, they do take a lot of looking after. They are quite old. The actual systems are designed basically in the 1920s. So, although we don't necessarily have to do this every time we actually want to fly the aircraft, it's best as far as we're concerned because we're concerned with the longevity of the engines. And it takes a lot of time to build one of these engines. Although we have a spare one under build now, we'd like to see it get something like 500 hours life out of the engine, which in flying terms for an aircraft on the display scene can be something in the region of 10 years. That's basically completed the initial part. Next object is next action is to actually get the engine oil through the system. What happens is that we have to wind the actual starter handle, and it will bring in the starter dogs to actually engage the starter motor so that we can actually turn the whole engine on the starting handle. And the next thing will be to switch the machine on to start the oil going through the engine, which is powered off of the trolley accumulator. To show the power. Hot oil is now being passed through the engine. There is a sight gauge on the side of the oil heater, which will tell us how much oil has gone through the engine. And the next thing is that once that starts to pass through, we will actually wind the handle, turn the engine over, so it assists the oil through the main bearings and through the other bearing surfaces of the engine. This mainly prevents any dry bearings within the engine as such, or bearings that are coated with the very thick, cold, sticky oil that is in there at the moment. So on start-up, you've got a nice, warm, oiled bearing there before, as the engine starts, and you don't get no dry bearings or any subsequent damage to the bearings. Well, the next thing we do is to actually pass, again, oil at the same temperature into the main blower bearings. Then at the rear of that particular one is another nipple which we will pass again hot oil into, which is the tower bearings. Tower bearings are the bearings of the unit that drives all the ancillaries of the engine. That is things like the vac pump and the hydraulic pumps, oil pumps. And of course, once this has been completed on the first engine, and of course the same procedure we carried out on the second engine. That's the actual last operation, apart from now of recowling the engine and also checking the main oil tank now for its contents. Right, the next thing is to actually pull the propeller through by hand, and this is to actually release the dogs of the hand start that when we actually put the handle in to use it to turn the engine over, is that those dogs are still engaged. We need those disengaged for when the aircraft starts on its electric start.
The general walk-around check is carried out. I always start that from the nose. Remove the pitot cover, that's stowed up in a little pocket in the nose section itself. From there I walk around to the first of the undercarriages. A good look at the brakes and the oleos. We should normally see about 4 or 5 inches of oleo extension. Up in the wheel bays, just check where the oil priming connectors were is all tightened again. The fuel priming system is in the undercarriage bays as well, so we just have a general look around that. It'll be used to start the engines, but at this stage we're just generally looking for leaks and any malfunction. Quick look at the engines again to make sure the cowlings are on properly, the exhaust stacks are on properly, and to confirm that the propellers have been pulled through. Then out to the wing, the general look at the condition of the leading edges, the wing tips for hanger rash, and the throw of the ailerons and the condition of the ailerons. Working inboard then along the back of the wing, a good look at the flaps and the flap operating system to check for any hydraulic leaks or wear in the linkages. That brings us into the rear fuselage. A look in there for the stowage of the rear battery to make sure it's stowed and connected properly, that there's no loose articles and that the turret is free and doesn't carry any leaks. Down to the rear of the aeroplane, good check of the elevator and rudder systems for freedom of movement and condition. A look at the trims to make sure that they're in the neutral position. Around the other side of the fuselage, along the trailing edge of the other wing, checking the flaps again, similar check on the aileron, along the leading edge of the wing and to the other engine, and the other engine is checked similarly to the first. And then it's up on top and a visual check of the fuel tanks, and then a check in the cockpit itself. The cockpit is very straightforward. Pre-start inspections are really that the fuel is turned to on, magnetos are switched to off, the throttles are in the closed position, undercarriage lever is down, flaps are up, and that the park brake is on. So once we're settled and happy, we're then ready for engine start. Fuel we've already checked is on, and I indicate to the ground crew on the outside that I'm ready for priming. So what they do, if the engines are cold, they'll prime the system with 4 shots of prime, and then hand pull the propellers through and then inject another 2 shots of prime. This ensures that the fuel that we've put in is generally circulated through all the cylinders, and we're guaranteed a good start rather than it turning over on the starter motor for a long period of time. So with that done, we check again, mags are off, they pull it through, the priming's finished, and then I select left-hand engine start, set the throttle about 1/2 inch from idle, the mixture into the normal position, mags both to on, and hit the starter and the boost button at the same time. First thing we check is that the oil pressure is rising steadily as the RPM picks up, and that the starter engage light is extinguished. So with oil pressure rising, the temperature will take a little while, so I'm basically looking for the pressure of the oil. Fuel pressure would have risen to about 3 psi at the same time. Everything on the outside looks happy, no fire warnings, so then we go to start the right. Similar priming process, similar starting process, and again, once fired, we start looking for oil pressure instantly. Starter engage light out, and we then let them sit down to settle into an idle of about 800 RPM. We allow the engines to warm up for approximately 6 or 8 minutes. The props are in their course position during this time, and the props use oil pressure to run them in the fine position. So we're anxious at the start of the engine warm-up cycle to not take any oil pressure away from the feed to the main bearings. So we leave the props in course until we have at least 20 degrees temperature for the oil, and that the pressure is steady at around about 90 psi. So we see 90, we then push the levers into fine pitch, and you can visually see the piston on the front of the propeller move forward. You'll see a slight blip on the oil pressure gauge, which also tells you that the oil feed is active to that piston. So now they're in the fine position, and we'll leave them there until we do the final engine checks before takeoff. So with chocks clear, we turn the avionics on, do an avionics check with the tower, taxi forward about 5 feet, and just give a quick test on the brakes. Taxiing is very simple in the Blenheim. On grass, you don't really need brakes at all. You can do it with differential power and by the use of the rudder. The rudder is quite large on the aircraft, and it becomes quite powerful even at taxiing speeds. On the hard, just blips of brake may be needed to initiate the swing to the turn, but after that, the taxiing is relatively simple. Up to the end for run-ups, and we park the aircraft into wind. This helps us with the cooling of the cylinders during the engine runs. We set the park brake, check temps and pressures are in the limits for ground running, and then I run up the left engine first to 1850 RPM and put the propeller back into course pitch. That done, I then increase the power to 0 boost, which is basically atmospheric pressure. We've got a reference RPM there of 2150, and if we don't get our reference of 2150 at 0 boost, if we're 50 or up to 100 short, then we know that there's possibly one cylinder is not firing properly, or if it's harder than that, then it's going to be more than one cylinder. If reference is achieved, then we do a magneto drop. We check first the left mag, then the right, and we're looking for somewhere between 50 and 80 as a normal drop. If we see more than 100, again it means we've got a plug out, or more than one plug out. So from 0 boost then, we check temperatures and pressures again. The oil pressure should be looking good at about 85. And we reduce the power down to idle. Idle RPM is 650, sometimes it creeps to 700. I then set the RPM on this engine to about 1,000 to keep it turning over nice and steadily, but not too low an RPM where it will start to choke up a bit on mixture. And then do the same checks for the right-hand engine. Those complete, I recheck that the props are definitely in the fine position after the cycling, that the mixtures are still in their normal position. Magnetos are all to on. We recheck that the fuel is on, the fuel pressure is good, and then run through the main pre-takeoff items. Those I normally talk through to myself in the aeroplane. Then it's general check of harnesses, that the sliding roof is closed, that the side window is closed, and all the rest of the crew are strapped in and ready for takeoff. And the last check is full and complete use of controls in the correct sense, and then we're clear to enter the runway for takeoff. We call the tower, we enter the runway, and on entering I then select the gills into the closed position. We always leave these until the last, purely to keep the cylinders as cool as possible before takeoff. So with those closed, we're lined up on the runway, we check the DI coincides with runway heading, and start the takeoff run. Brakes are released. The throttles are moved gently through the first gate and into the second, which will give us plus 2.5 pounds boost. The aircraft has a slight tendency to swing to the right, but it's very easily counteracted with the rudder. We reach 65 miles an hour, and you can start to feel the tail rising. We let that rise, and then the aircraft's literally flown off the ground in a slight tail down attitude. I normally lift off at 90 miles an hour. As soon as the wheels are off the ground, undercarriage is selected up to take away the drag of the big sort of barn doors that form the cowlings on the undercarriage. And the aircraft accelerates quite well through 95 and onwards to about 120. Once 120 is seen, that's our normal climb speed. And at that speed we're looking at normally between 15 and 1800 feet per minute climb. The powers are reduced. If we're at 4.25, back to 2.5. If we're already at 2.5, then they're left for the initial part of the climb. Undercarriage is checked up, and we turn into the circuit at about 500 feet, checking temps and pressures are still steady, that everything else looks happy, and that the aircraft feels happy in the climb. Then reducing power again to about plus 1 pounds boost. We initially enter the circuit, and we're now at about 1,000 feet, and we pull the prop pitch levers into the course position. These propellers are purely fine or coarse pitch, they don't constant speed, and so you actually end up handling the engines as if they were fixed pitch propellers. So at 1,000 feet we're into course, that reduces the RPM down to about 2,050. We then reduce to zero boost and just let the aircraft settle down, let the cylinder head temperatures settle down, and see how it feels. You get a good idea of whether the aircraft is happy by the feel through the stick, especially on this aeroplane. If anything is abnormal, you'll feel it. If one of the cow gills has started to come open, you'll feel the buffet over the elevators. If there's anything wrong with the engines, then they readily emit vibration through the wing spars and into the aeroplane. So you can get a lot of senses of whether the aeroplane is happy by just feeling what it feels like in those first few minutes. The gun turret in the Blenheim is fully operational. We restored it with the intention that it, apart from the guns of course, that it would be a fully operational turret. It's supplied by hydraulic pressure from the main aircraft system. So the turret is treated as a piece part of the whole aeroplane and not just a bolt-on addition. If we have a hydraulic leak in the turret area, then it's the same system that's supplying undercarriage and flaps. So it's very important that the turret is as airworthy as the rest of the aeroplane. It's supplied with pressure from the main selector in the cockpit. Once airborne, the gear is up, the flaps are up. We then select the pressure to go to the gun turret. When you're sitting in the turret, you are on a seat which will rise and fall at the same time that the guns rise and fall. So as you twist the hand grip in front of you, if you twist it backwards, then the guns will go up, the seat will go down, so it maintains your eye level across the gun sight all of the time. To go to the left and right, it's a simple affair, rather like a bike handlebar, where you turn the handlebar to the right and the gun turret will turn to the right, and similarly to the left. It's basically like flying a nice light aeroplane. Aileron control is very good, and the ailerons give a very nice rate of roll even for the size of this aeroplane. The rudder is large and very, very powerful. In flight, you very rarely use it. Actually, in the pilot's notes, it recommends that you even remove your feet from the rudder pedal and just use ailerons for turning. Because the design of the fin and rudder is such that it will automatically lead it anyway. General handling is very good, very smooth. The view out the front is excellent. And on the ground, taxiing, to take off, to in the circuit work, to back landing again, the general handling of the aircraft is faultless, other than you just need to be very careful when using the engines. If there is a weakness with the aeroplane, it's in the engine use and how you use them. You have to be very, very careful with throttle openings, be very consistent at watching temperatures and pressures, and be very aware that when something goes wrong with a Mercury, it tends to happen quite quickly. The engines are very responsive. The aircraft is very light, as it is in this configuration. So the power to weight ratio of this model in comparison to a wartime aircraft is better. At Duxford, I normally do my first run-in directly at crowd from over the hill, which forms a famous backdrop to Duxford Airfield. We now set 0 boost. This is the power setting I use for most of the display. And we run in over the hill. The speed now will have increased to around about the 210 mile an hour mark. As soon as we get to the hard runway, that's my key for the normal pull-up. Flying the Blenheim is like flying no other aeroplane. I suppose it's a lot different for me because I've been involved with restoring 2 aircraft. I've crashed in 1 and now I'm flying the 2nd. So there's a lot of emotive issues with it. So we have an aeroplane that is very pleasant to fly. It's a lovely aeroplane to fly. You never get to the position, or I haven't got to the position where it's just another flight in the Blenheim. Every flight in the Blenheim is very special. It's an aeroplane that is very unique. Its flying qualities are normal, but the aeroplane itself is very unique. And whenever I'm flying it, it's a pleasure to fly. And you can't help but think of all the thousands of man-hours that have gone into producing this, the only flying Blenheim that is now left. And of course, the memories of the many thousands of these aeroplanes and the many thousands of people that flew in them, who are not around anymore.
I love to see the aircraft fly. I feel great pride in the fact that this small team at Duxford has put the only example in the world back into the air, because it's a fitting tribute to all the thousands who flew Blenheims during the war. And it's an aircraft which has been long overlooked, in fact sadly neglected by historians, and I wanted to put it back in its rightful place.
The run-in and brake is used for a number of reasons, but the most obvious is to position the aircraft over the field at good speed and then lose that speed by pulling G into the initial climb and turn, gaining height, and then you're at the right speed for your circuit, and you're at a good height and a good position to the airfield. But if you should sustain an engine failure any time in the circuit, you should be able to make the field by gliding at all times. So on the pull-up, the speed's decreasing now. We're looking at 120 miles an hour as the maximum for our gear and flap operation, and we can achieve that quite quickly. As soon as I've pulled up, the rear crew member knows to vacate the turret and take his seat for landing, which means I can then reselect hydraulic pressure into gear and flaps. This I do, and the first thing to go out is the undercarriage. The undercarriage travels reasonably quickly. It takes about 6 or 7 seconds from full up to full down position, and that's clarified as locked by 2 green lights in the cockpit. But you can also visually see the undercarriage legs from the cockpit, so you can see that they're actually fully down and locked. We then settle down into the circuit. The speed is reduced now to about 115, and I normally just put in about 10 degree of flap to help the aeroplane settle into the circuit a little bit better. Gills we leave fully closed, and then I run through a quick check on mixtures are still in normal. That prop pitch now can go up into the fine position again because we've reduced engine power. That causes the RPMs to climb from about 1800 RPM to about 2.2, and you can hear the rise in RPM quite vividly from in the cockpit. The undercarriage doors cause like a buffeting effect around them in the circuit, which is quite comforting. So we're now looking at the runway, and I normally tag the edge of the roundel down the runway length, and I know from one wing width past the end of the runway that if I lost all power, a glide from that position would put me smack on the numbers. The Blenheim glides very well in the circuit, and in fact the when it first came into operational use, they used to always use a glide approach. We just tend to keep the engines ticking over at about 1,000 RPM during all of our approach, in case there was a need for a go-round. So we now come on to base leg and go for half flap. I always visually check yet again that the gear is down, that the pitch is fully fine, and then trim it for 100 miles an hour. So I've trimmed now for hands off at 100 miles an hour. We're coming down base, we've cleared tower for land. The view from the cockpit is very good. You can, especially in a left-hand circuit, as you're sitting on the left, you can see the airfield very well indeed. And the scallop nose gives you a wonderful view fully forward. I tend to do a normal curving approach, reducing the power all the time as the threshold of the runway comes into view. We're now down to about 90 miles an hour, falling steadily through to 80. And I start to now check back and put the aircraft into a 3-point attitude ready for the landing. It 3 points very well, and the aircraft normally touches down at about 65 miles an hour in the full 3-point attitude. And unless you have a very strong crosswind, the aircraft will normally run very straight. The brakes are not needed at all to keep it straight, the rudder being more than powerful enough to do that. Engines are at full idle, and we just let the aircraft trundle to a nice taxiing speed. First thing to do then is to get the gills open again to make sure that these cylinders are not going to start to overheat again. Select flaps up, and then we turn off the runway. Hydraulic pressure again is checked and good, and while we're taxiing in, we're just keeping a watchful eye on the pneumatic pressure to make sure we've got the brakes when we need them. Temperatures are normally quite stable now. The engines have had a good cooling process within the circuit, and there's normal ample time to taxi back to the stand, ready for close down. So back at the stand it's chocks in, which means we can release the brakes, and then we pull the propellers back into the course pitch position again to rid those cylinders of oil at the front of the propellers, and then let the engine sit and idle at 750 RPM for at least 2 minutes. What this does is enable the scavenge pump to scavenge the engine oil from the engine and return it to the oil tank, so that when the aircraft sits in the hangar for the next few days or maybe even weeks, this oil that otherwise would be sitting in the engines is not leaking out everywhere. But it just takes a couple of minutes for the scavenge pumps to return that to the tank. Once that's happened, we pull the cutouts and the engines cut down from the idle position and stop. Then it's magnetos off, fuel off, the brakes we already have off, and then the general electrics off, we turn the avionics off, cage the DIs, and that's the end of the flight.